A storm, a moment of courage, and a chance encounter that changed lives forever. Brendon was living an ordinary life in a mountain town, until an unexpected snowstorm forced him to face a destiny he never anticipated. Trapped in his restaurant, a distant cry for help shattered the silence and set everything in motion. Rachel, clinging to the edge of a cliff, fought to survive. Brendon's bravery saved her life, but this was more than just a rescue. That night sparked new dreams, second chances, and a bond neither of them expected. Discover how courage and split-second decisions can create miracles. A single act of bravery transformed two lives forever. Ready for an inspiring story? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Brendon, a 25-year-old young man, had spent his entire life in a mountain town, working at a local restaurant. Due to financial constraints, he had never left the town and lived with his family in a mountain cabin. His family made a living as woodcutters and carpenters, but Brendon wasn't skilled in their trade. Instead, he preferred working at the restaurant where he felt relatively happier. Growing up in the town had given Brendon something else: dreams and entrepreneurial ideas. He had always seen the potential of living in a tourist area but lacked the resources to turn his vision into reality. Over time, he set those dreams aside and adapted to the routine of small-town life. The steep slopes and treacherous roads made his daily trips even tougher on his mountain bike. Yet he pushed through the struggle every day and continued with his work. But that evening everything changed. Brendon had worked until closing time, and after the rest of the staff left, he found himself alone in the restaurant. Suddenly, an unexpected snowstorm struck the town and the surrounding mountains with fierce intensity. The storm was unlike anything the mountains had seen in years. Blinding snow and an icy darkness left Brendon unsure of what to do. This storm wasn't just a test of nature's power, it was about to mark the beginning of a new chapter in Brendon's life, one that would take him far beyond the boundaries of the town he had always known. Realizing he couldn't make it home, Brendon used the restaurant's landline to call his boss. His boss explained that he didn't have a vehicle capable of handling the storm and suggested Brendon stay in the restaurant, turning on the heaters to keep warm. Brendon thanked him, hung up, and headed to the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee. As he sipped his coffee, he stared out the window. The snowstorm painted a mesmerizing yet eerie scene. For a moment, Brendon felt lost in thought, but the peace was short-lived. Suddenly, a noise snapped him back to reality. A loud sliding sound was followed by the screech of brakes and then the sharp blare of an alarm. At this hour and in such a storm, no one was supposed to be in this part of town. Quickly, he threw on his jacket, grabbed a flashlight and hurried down the slope. When he reached the source of the sound, he couldn't believe his eyes. A black SUV had skidded off the road and was teetering on the edge of a cliff. The storm's intensity was growing, and Brendon's wide-eyed expression mirrored his inner fear. This was a moment that demanded action, even if he didn't yet know what to do. Brendon quickly snapped out of his shock and moved closer to the car. In the driver's seat sat a young woman, Rachel, staring ahead in panic, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She hadn't noticed Brendon yet. The car was precariously balanced on the edge of the cliff, ready to plunge at any moment. Brendon shouted loudly, "I'm here. Don't worry, stay calm." Hearing his voice, Rachel let out a terrified scream, her fear and shock evident. "Help me. Please," she cried, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. Brendon called out again, this time more calmly, "I'm going to open the back door now. Don't move. I'll guide you step by step, but you need to stay calm and trust me." Rachel remained silent, but her wide eyes betrayed her terror. Brendon carefully reached for the back door, but as he did, the car wobbled and slid slightly closer to the edge. Rachel's panic escalated, and she could barely process what Brendon was saying. Both of them were on edge, but Brendon knew he had to stay composed. "Give me your hand now," he said firmly. Rachel hesitated, but when she finally grabbed Brendon's hand, she felt a glimmer of reassurance. "You have to follow my instructions exactly," Brendon said with a steady voice. "If we panic, this will get worse." Rachel nodded weakly, gripping his hand tightly. Brendon added, "I'm going to pull you out slowly, but you have to stay calm. Any sudden movement could make things worse." The storm's fury intensified, and the wind made every motion more difficult. The car swayed with each gust, and every jolt seemed to chip away at their hope. But giving up was not an option. As Brendon carefully began to pull Rachel toward him, the car lurched and swayed violently. Suddenly, the storm delivered a powerful gust, shaking the vehicle even more. Just as the car teetered on the brink of falling, Brendon mustered all his strength and yanked Rachel toward him in one swift motion. Rachel landed safely in Brendon's arms, trembling but unharmed. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as they locked eyes, their breaths ragged and filled with the weight of what had just happened. The car, now freed from Rachel's weight, shifted slightly but remained balanced. What could have been a fatal disaster had been narrowly avoided, thanks to Brendon's courage and Rachel's trust. The storm still howled around them, but they both knew they had just survived something extraordinary. Brendon and Rachel, with a tremendous effort, scrambled out of the car. They tumbled into the snow, rolling a short distance before coming to a stop. Their hands remained tightly clasped, refusing to let go. Just then, a powerful explosion sounded behind them. The black SUV had slid off the cliff and burst into flames. They turned, stunned, watching the firelight flicker against the stormy darkness. The force of their fall had left Rachel sprawled on top of Brendon. Despite the freezing cold, they could feel each other's warm breath on their faces. The fear they had felt moments earlier was replaced by a profound sense of relief and the overwhelming joy of being alive. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie, yet the intensity in each other's eyes confirmed it was all too real. As the icy wind lashed against their faces, they realized they couldn't stay there. Without speaking, they straightened themselves, helping each other to stand in the deep snow. They were alive, but the storm still raged, and neither knew where it would lead them next. Brendon picked up Rachel, whose legs were trembling from shock and fear, and began walking toward the cafe with slow, steady steps. Despite the icy wind biting at his face, he pressed forward without stopping. When they finally reached the cafe, they could hear the crackling sound of the fireplace before even opening the door. Brendon pushed the door open and gently set Rachel down on a chair. He immediately checked on her, asking, "Are you hurt anywhere?" Rachel shook her head lightly and said, "I'm fine." But as she spoke, tears started streaming down her face. The fear from the ordeal still gripped her, and she was just beginning to recover. Brendon grabbed a blanket and carefully wrapped it around Rachel's shoulders. Then he headed to the kitchen, brewed 2 fresh cups of coffee, and handed one to her. They sat in silence, sipping their coffee until Rachel finally broke the quiet. "I came here this morning for a project," she began. "I'm an energy engineer, and my father made a significant investment in a facility nearby. I needed to inspect the site, but the storm got worse so quickly, and I had already gone too far to turn back. Before I knew it, my car skidded off the road and down the slope, leaving me hanging on the edge of the cliff. For a moment, I was so terrified that everything went dark. And then, I heard your voice." Rachel looked at Brendon with an expression of deep gratitude. She knew she wouldn't be alive if it weren't for him. Brendon listened quietly, feeling the weight of everything she had gone through. Outside, the storm still howled fiercely, but inside, the warmth of the fire and the growing connection between them slowly began to push away the cold. For a moment, Brendon thought about the destruction the storm could cause. He felt lucky to be trapped inside the restaurant after closing, safe and warm. "Good thing I stayed late to close up," he thought. Turning to Rachel, he asked, "Would you like me to call an ambulance or contact your family?" Rachel nodded and said, "Yes, I need to call my dad." Brendon handed her his phone. However, the storm was interfering with the signal, and the connection was patchy. Despite the difficulty, Rachel managed to let her father know where she was and that she was safe. As they waited by the warmth of the fireplace, they started talking. Brendon opened up about his life and dreams. Rachel listened attentively, quickly realizing how intelligent and ambitious he was. His thoughts and vision went far beyond the simple life of their small mountain town. While she admired his aspirations, she was also trying to process the shock of what she had just been through. After some time, the glow of headlights appeared in the distance. Rachel's father had arrived. The moment he walked in, he rushed to his daughter and wrapped her in a tight hug. "Why didn't you turn back? I told you a storm was coming," he said, his voice a mix of worry and frustration. Rachel replied, "I thought I'd make it before the storm hit. I didn't expect it to get this bad." She paused before adding, "Don't worry, Dad, I'm okay. Thanks to him." She turned to Brendon, her expression filled with gratitude. Then she recounted the entire ordeal to her father, who became more astonished with each detail. Finally, he looked at Brendon and said, "I can't thank you enough for saving my daughter." Brendon smiled humbly and replied, "I just did what anyone should do." The storm still raged outside, but inside, the atmosphere was filled with warmth, gratitude, and a sense of awe for everything that had transpired. That night, Rachel and her father left the restaurant, expressing their heartfelt gratitude to Brendon. As Rachel recounted the events to her father, she often turned to Brendon with admiration in her eyes. Brendon quietly watched their departure, then retreated to rest for a few hours. By morning, the storm had completely subsided. The air was calm and cold, but the traces of the night's chaos were still evident everywhere. Brendon opened the restaurant as usual, ready for the day ahead. Around midday, a crew arrived and began working near the cliff where Rachel's car had nearly fallen. They installed sturdy railings and protective barriers. Seeing this, Brendon felt a sense of relief. No one will have to face such danger again, he thought. A little later, Rachel's father walked into the restaurant. With a serious yet warm expression, he addressed Brendon. "Brendon, may I have a word with you?" Brendon nodded and said, "Of course, sir," inviting him in. They talked for a while, and after observing Brendon's humble and kind demeanor, Rachel's father got to the point. "You saved my daughter, and I can never thank you enough for that. But there's something I can do for you. Rachel told me you've always dreamed of starting your own business. I've made a significant investment in the energy facility here, and I want you to manage it. It's a great opportunity for you. You know the area, you have vision, and I believe you're more than capable." Brendon was speechless. Excitement and disbelief swirled within him. This was the opportunity he had dreamed of but never thought he could achieve. With Rachel's father's encouragement, Brendon accepted the offer. Over time, Brendon proved his skills and leadership abilities. As a young manager, he successfully grew the energy facility and became a source of pride for the small mountain town. Locals often spoke of his accomplishments, and realizing his vision brought Brendon immense happiness and pride. Rachel occasionally visited the town, spending time with Brendon and reminiscing about the night that changed everything. Both began to realize that their bond went beyond mere friendship. As Rachel listened to Brendon's dreams, she saw more clearly how unique and extraordinary he was. One evening, as they sat in the restaurant, Rachel asked, "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if you hadn't stayed at the restaurant that night?" Brendon smiled softly and replied, "Sometimes life takes us where we're meant to be in its own mysterious ways." That night, Brendon hadn't just saved Rachel's life, he had also found the path to his dreams. Both of them understood how courage and decisions made in critical moments could transform lives forever. If you enjoyed this inspiring story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more heartfelt and impactful stories on our channel.